The tranquil night had settled over Ouagadougou like a gentle blanket, but sleep eluded Ibrahim Traoré's weary eyes. He stood by the grand windows of the presidential palace, gazing out at the city lights that twinkled like earthbound stars. The weight of an entire nation rested upon his shoulders. Yet tonight, a different burden troubled his heart. Ibrahim was a man who had commanded the attention of millions, delivering thunderous speeches that could move mountains and inspire revolutions. He had led his people through storms of political upheaval, economic crisis, and social transformation. His red beret had become a symbol of hope, his presence a beacon of strength for Burkina Faso. Yet despite all his achievements, despite the adoration of crowds and the respect of world leaders, there remained a hollow ache in his chest, an emptiness that power could never fill. The longing was for authentic love. Love that wasn't drawn to his crimson military cap, his presidential office, or the authority he wielded. Love that would embrace the man beneath the uniform, the human soul that beat within the leader's chest. Every day, people bowed before him, chanted his name in celebration, and offered prayers for his success. Women, too, praised him endlessly, but their eyes always held that familiar glitter. The hunger for power, the attraction to status, the magnetism of authority rather than the warmth of genuine human connection. Ibrahim understood their motivations all too well. They didn't love him. They loved what he represented, what he could provide, what association with him might bring to their lives. This realization haunted his sleepless nights, echoing through the marble halls of his palatial residence. The question that tormented him was simple yet profound. Was there someone, anywhere, who could love him purely for the person he was inside? As dawn approached, casting the first golden rays across the African sky, Ibrahim made a decision that would have seemed like madness to anyone who knew him. It was a resolution born from desperate longing and unwavering determination to discover the truth about love. He would abandon his identity, shed his prestigious role, and live as an ordinary man. He would find a place where no one recognized him as president, where people would see him simply as another human being struggling to make ends meet. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. He would become a common laborer, perhaps a janitor or maintenance worker, somewhere far from the political spotlight. Only by stripping away all external markers of his status could he hope to find someone who might love the essence of who he truly was. The morning sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold as Ibrahim began his extraordinary transformation. In the privacy of his personal chambers, he carefully removed the olive-green military uniform that had become his second skin. The red beret, that iconic symbol of his leadership and the revolution that brought him to power, was folded with reverence and placed in a wooden box, like a treasured relic of a former life. From the depths of his closet, he retrieved clothes he hadn't worn in years, faded blue work pants, a simple cotton shirt that had seen better days, and worn leather shoes that spoke of long hours of honest labor. Looking at himself in the mirror, he saw not the commanding presence of a president, but the reflection of an ordinary man, someone who could blend into any crowd, unremarkable and unrecognized. The most challenging part wasn't changing his clothes, it was altering his entire demeanor. Ibrahim had to suppress the natural authority in his voice, the confident stride that commanded attention, and the piercing gaze that could silence a room. He practiced walking with slightly hunched shoulders, speaking in softer tones, and avoiding the direct eye contact that marked him as a leader. His trusted aide, Captain Ouedraogo, was the only person who knew of this extraordinary plan. "Mon Président," the captain had pleaded, "this is too dangerous. Let me assign a security detail to watch from a distance." But Ibrahim was resolute. True anonymity required complete isolation from his former life. As he prepared to leave the palace, Ibrahim felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in years, he would be truly alone, without the protective bubble of security personnel, official vehicles, and formal protocols. He would experience life as his fellow citizens lived it, vulnerable, uncertain, but beautifully authentic. The University Hostel he had chosen was perfect for his purposes. It was far enough from the political center to ensure anonymity, yet diverse enough that a middle-aged maintenance worker wouldn't seem out of place. Students from various backgrounds lived there, creating an environment where someone could easily remain unnoticed while observing human nature in its purest form. The morning air was crisp with the promise of a new beginning as Ibrahim approached the University Hostel. The building was a modest three-story structure, its walls bearing the weathered marks of countless students who had called it home. The sounds of laughter, heated discussions, and the general cacophony of young people starting their day filled the atmosphere with vibrant energy. Students rushed past him carrying backpacks, books, and the dreams that only youth can carry with such unwavering optimism. Some were heading to morning lectures, others to the dining hall for breakfast. The diversity was remarkable. Young people from villages and cities, different ethnicities and backgrounds, all united by their pursuit of education and a better future. For the first time in years, Ibrahim walked among people without causing a stir. No one turned to stare. No one whispered his name. No one felt compelled to offer respectful greetings. The anonymity was both liberating and slightly unsettling. He had grown so accustomed to being the center of attention that this invisibility felt like wearing an entirely new skin. At the entrance, a stern-looking woman in her 50s stood with a clipboard pressed against her chest and the unmistakable aura of someone accustomed to wielding authority within her domain. Her name tag read Mrs. Aya Konate, Hostel. Supervisor. Her sharp eyes assessed Ibrahim with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with countless temporary workers over the years. "You're the new maintenance worker?" she asked, her tone brisk and businesslike, cutting through the morning air with the precision of a blade. Ibrahim lowered his gaze respectfully, suppressing every instinct that told him to stand tall and command attention. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice deliberately meek and uncertain. Without ceremony, Mrs. Konate thrust a well-worn broom and a dented metal bucket into his hands. The tools felt foreign and heavy, not because of their weight, but because of what they represented, a complete reversal of his accustomed role in society. "You'll clean the corridors," she instructed with the efficiency of a military commander. "Start from the ground floor and work your way up. No dawdling, no chatting with the students, and don't expect help from anyone. The students are here to study, not to clean up after themselves, and the other workers have their own responsibilities." And so it was that Ibrahim Traoré, the president who commanded the respect of millions, took his first tentative steps into a world where he was nobody special, just another maintenance worker in a university hostel, invisible and unremarkable, exactly as he had hoped to be. The morning was alive with the typical chaos of student life. Corridors echoed with the sounds of hurried footsteps, slamming doors, and animated conversations in multiple languages. Some students rushed past clutching books and coffee cups, racing against time to reach their first classes. Others moved at a more leisurely pace, discussing the previous night's studies or weekend plans with the casual confidence of youth. Ibrahim stood in the middle of this bustling environment, gripping his broom with hands that were more familiar with signing international treaties than pushing dust across worn linoleum floors. There was something profoundly humbling about the moment, a strange peace that came from being completely unrecognized and unremarkable. The work was harder than he had anticipated. His back ached from the unfamiliar posture of sweeping, his hands developed small blisters from gripping the rough wooden handle, and sweat began to bead on his forehead, despite the relatively cool morning air. Years of sedentary work behind presidential desks had not prepared his body for physical labor. But there was also something deeply satisfying about seeing the immediate, tangible results of his efforts. Mrs. Konate's voice cut through his thoughts like a whip crack. "What kind of cleaning is this?" she demanded, her tone sharp with disapproval. "Look at these corners. There's still dirt everywhere." "Did your mother never teach you how to properly clean a floor?" The other maintenance workers, who had paused in their own tasks to witness the supervisor's tirade, began to snicker quietly among themselves. Their laughter wasn't malicious, but it stung nonetheless. Ibrahim felt his jaw tighten instinctively, the automatic response of a man accustomed to respect and deference. Every fiber of his being wanted to straighten his shoulders, meet her gaze directly, and remind her that she was speaking to the president of the nation. Instead, he forced himself to lower his eyes and nod submissively. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll do better." The response seemed to satisfy Mrs. Konate, who moved on to terrorize another unfortunate worker. But the moment was a crucial test for Ibrahim. He had passed his first examination in humility, learning that true strength sometimes lay not in asserting authority, but in accepting criticism with grace. As he resumed his sweeping, pushing the broom with renewed focus and attention to detail, Ibrahim reflected on a truth he had almost forgotten from his youth in the villages. Hard work, honest physical labor, had its own dignity. There was nobility in taking pride in simple tasks well done, in contributing to the cleanliness and order that made life more pleasant for others. Lunchtime arrived with its own particular energy. The dining hall filled with the aromatic smells of local cuisine, rice and beans, grilled meat, fresh vegetables, and the warm bread that was a staple of student meals. Students gathered around tables, their conversations ranging from academic discussions to gossip, from political debates to romantic entanglements. The maintenance workers had their own section in a corner of the dining hall, a collection of mismatched tables and chairs that had seen better days. Ibrahim sat alone at the edge of this section, methodically eating the simple meal of rice and lentils that had been provided. The food was basic but filling, seasoned with the satisfaction that comes from having earned one's meal through honest work. It was during this quiet moment of solitude that his attention was drawn to a figure that seemed to move through the chaos of the dining hall with remarkable serenity. She was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with the kind of understated beauty that didn't demand attention, but somehow commanded it nonetheless. What struck Ibrahim most was not her appearance, but her behavior. While other workers rushed through their tasks with the mechanical efficiency of those eager to finish and rest, she moved with deliberate care and attention. When she cleaned tables, she didn't simply wipe them down. She ensured that every surface was thoroughly sanitized. When she swept floors, she paid attention to corners and edges that others might ignore. Most remarkably, when students left messes behind, spilled drinks, dropped food, scattered papers, she cleaned up without the slightest trace of resentment or frustration. Her name, he learned by listening to others, was Elena. She was different from the other workers in ways that extended far beyond her approach to menial labor. While others complained about their circumstances, gossiped about the students, or counting the minutes until their shifts ended, Elena maintained a quiet dignity that was both inspiring and intriguing. During the meal, Ibrahim observed her sitting apart from the other workers, a small lunchbox open before her and a worn paperback book in her hands. She would take a bite of her simple meal, then read a few lines, her concentration complete and unbroken by the noise and activity surrounding her. There was something almost meditative about her routine, a sense of someone who had found ways to nurture her mind and spirit even in the most humble circumstances. When one of the students, a young man who had been drinking heavily the night before, stumbled and knocked over his tray, sending food and dishes crashing to the floor, the reaction was typical. Other workers looked away, muttering about inconsiderate students and additional work. Mrs. Konate began a tirade about respect and responsibility, but Elena simply set down her book, rose from her seat, and began cleaning up the mess with the same careful attention she brought to all her tasks. When the embarrassed student tried to help and apologize, she smiled gently and said, "It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes. Just be careful next time." Ibrahim watched this interaction with growing fascination. Here was someone who seemed to understand that dignity didn't come from the work you did, but from how you chose to do it. As days turned into weeks, Ibrahim began to understand the rhythms and patterns of hostel life. Each morning brought the same controlled chaos, students rushing to classes, the sounds of showers running, doors slamming, and the general commotion of hundreds of young people beginning their days. His body had adapted to the physical demands of his work. His hands had developed calluses, his back had strengthened, and he had learned the most efficient ways to complete his assigned tasks. but his attention increasingly focused on Elena, whose presence seemed to bring an inexplicable sense of calm to even the most chaotic situations. She had a remarkable ability to diffuse tension, solve problems, and offer comfort without drawing attention to herself or expecting recognition for her efforts. One particular incident crystallized Ibrahim's growing admiration for her character. A first-year student named Fatimata had received devastating news from home. Her father had suffered a heart attack and was hospitalized in critical condition. The young woman had collapsed in the common room, sobbing uncontrollably, her grief raw and overwhelming. The reaction from others was predictably varied. Some students offered awkward words of sympathy before hurrying away, uncomfortable with such raw emotion. Others simply avoided the area entirely, not wanting to be drawn into someone else's tragedy. Mrs. Konate, true to her character, was annoyed by the disruption and suggested that personal problems should be dealt with privately. Elena's response was entirely different. She approached Fatimata with the quiet confidence of someone who understood both grief and comfort. Without saying a word, she sat beside the crying student and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't offer empty platitudes or false reassurances. Instead, she simply provided her presence, steady, warm, and completely focused on offering whatever comfort she could. When Fatimata's sobbing began to subside, Elena spoke softly. Sometimes the heart needs to pour out all its pain before it can begin to heal. Don't try to hold it in. Cry as much as you need to. She stayed with Fatimata for over an hour, missing her own lunch break and risking Mrs. Konate's disapproval. She brought tissues, a glass of water, and most importantly, the kind of compassionate presence that can make unbearable moments slightly more bearable. Ibrahim watched this scene unfold from a distance, cleaning the same section of corridor multiple times so he could observe without being obvious. He was witnessing something rare and precious, genuine human kindness offered without expectation of reward or recognition. Later that evening, when Mrs. Konate confronted Elena about her unauthorized absence from her assigned duties, Elena's response was characteristically gracious. "I'm sorry if I caused any inconvenience. Sometimes people need help that goes beyond our job descriptions. I believe that's part of being human." The supervisor was clearly frustrated by this response. It was difficult to argue against basic human compassion, and she stalked away muttering about bleeding hearts and professional boundaries. That night, as Ibrahim lay on his narrow bed in the workers' quarters, he reflected on what he had witnessed. Elena wasn't just performing her job. She was living according to a set of principles that placed human dignity and compassion above convenience or personal advancement. In a world that often seemed driven by self-interest and ambition, she represented something increasingly rare, genuine goodness that asked for nothing in return. The ancient mango tree behind the hostel had become Elena's sanctuary. Every day, after completing her morning duties and eating a quick lunch, she would make her way to the shade of its broad canopy. There, with her worn paperback book and small lunchbox, she would spend her precious break time in peaceful solitude. Ibrahim had noticed this pattern and found himself increasingly drawn to the same area. Initially, he told himself it was simply a coincidence. The tree provided excellent shade, and it was a natural place to rest after hours of physical labor. But truthfully, he was drawn by Elena's presence and the aura of calm that seemed to surround her like a gentle field of energy. For several days, they shared the space in comfortable silence. Elena would read her book. He noticed it was a medical textbook, despite her position as a maintenance worker, while Ibrahim would sit at a respectful distance, ostensibly resting but actually observing her quiet concentration and evident intelligence. One afternoon, a sudden downpour drove them both under the tree's protective canopy. The rain created a natural curtain around them, providing an intimacy that made conversation seem both inevitable and natural. "You always read medical books," Ibrahim observed, his voice gentle with curiosity rather than intrusion. Elena looked up from her textbook, seeming slightly embarrassed to have been noticed. "It's probably foolish," she said, her voice carrying a note of self-consciousness. A maintenance worker studying to become a doctor. Dreams are never foolish, Ibrahim replied, with the conviction of someone who had learned hard lessons about the power of hope and determination. They're what make us human. Something in his tone seemed to reach her, and for the first time since he had arrived at the hostel, Elena truly looked at him, not as a fellow worker to be acknowledged politely, but as a person worth knowing. What about you? She asked. Do you have dreams beyond this? She gestured toward the hostel, encompassing their shared circumstances. The question caught Ibrahim off guard. How could he explain that his dreams had nothing to do with career advancement or personal achievement? How could he tell her that his greatest longing was simply to be seen and valued for who he was beneath all the external trappings of success? I dream of finding something real, he said finally, the words carrying more weight than she could possibly understand. Something genuine in a world that often seems filled with pretense. Elena nodded thoughtfully, as if his words had touched something deep within her own experience. I understand, she said softly. Sometimes I feel like I'm surrounded by people, but still completely alone. The rain continued to fall around them, creating a cocoon of privacy in the midst of the bustling hostel environment. In that moment, Ibrahim felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of genuine human connection based on mutual understanding rather than his position or power. As Ibrahim's admiration for Elena deepened, he began to understand that her character was revealed not in grand gestures, but in countless small acts of kindness that she performed without fanfare or expectation of recognition. She was, he realized, someone who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be if everyone chose compassion over indifference. One morning, he witnessed her helping an elderly man who had come to the hostel looking for his daughter, a student who had apparently missed several classes. The man was clearly worried and disoriented, struggling with the bureaucratic maze of university procedures and hostel regulations. Mrs. Konate had dismissed him curtly. This isn't an information desk. Find your own daughter. But Elena had approached the worried father with genuine concern. She spent her break time helping him navigate the system, making phone calls, and eventually locating his daughter, who had been sick with fever and unable to contact home. The reunion between father and daughter was tearful and grateful, and the man had tried to press money into Elena's hands as a thank you gesture. She had refused, of course, with the gentle firmness of someone for whom kindness was its own reward. No, uncle. Helping people isn't something you do for payment. It's something you do because it's right. Another day, Ibrahim watched her share her lunch with a student who had lost his wallet and hadn't eaten in 2 days. She didn't make a show of her generosity. She simply divided her modest meal in half and offered it as naturally as if sharing food was the most obvious thing in the world. Aren't you hungry? The student had asked, clearly embarrassed by his need. A little hunger never hurt anyone, Elena had replied with a smile. But a lot of hunger can hurt everyone. These observations reinforced Ibrahim's growing certainty that Elena was exactly the kind of person he had been searching for, someone whose goodness came from within, whose compassion was genuine, and whose character remained consistent regardless of who was watching or what she might gain from her actions. But they also created a dilemma. How long could he maintain his deception? How fair was it to allow her to develop feelings for someone who wasn't being completely honest about his identity? And yet how could he reveal the truth without destroying the very thing he was trying to find? Love based on who he was rather than what he represented. The question tormented him during long, sleepless nights in the workers' quarters. He had come to the hostel seeking authentic love, but his deception felt increasingly like a betrayal of the honesty and transparency that characterized Elena's every action. The internal conflict that had been building within. Ibrahim reached a crescendo on a day when Elena's true character was tested, in ways that revealed the depth of her integrity and compassion. It began with what seemed like a minor incident, a kitchen accident that could have had serious consequences. One of the cooking staff had left a gas cylinder improperly secured, And during the busy lunch preparation, it began leaking. The smell of gas filled the kitchen area, creating a potentially dangerous situation that could have resulted in fire or explosion. Panic began to spread among the staff. Some fled the area entirely, while others stood frozen with uncertainty about how to respond. Mrs. Konate, for all her authoritarian bluster, proved useless in the crisis. She shouted contradictory orders, blamed everyone within earshot, and generally contributed to the chaos rather than helping to resolve the situation. Elena, however, responded with the calm efficiency of someone trained in emergency procedures. She immediately opened all windows and doors to ventilate the area, shut off the main gas supply, and organized an orderly evacuation of everyone in the vicinity. When the immediate danger had passed, she worked alongside Ibrahim and others to clean up the affected area and ensure that normal operations could resume safely. Her actions were those of a natural leader, someone who could assess a crisis, make quick decisions, and inspire others to work together toward a solution. Ibrahim found himself wondering what other talents and capabilities she possessed, that her current circumstances didn't allow her to display. But it was Elena's interaction with Mrs. Konate after the crisis that truly impressed him. The supervisor, embarrassed by her own inadequate response and looking for someone to blame, had begun berating the kitchen staff for their carelessness and incompetence. Elena stepped forward with quiet authority. "Ma'am, accidents happen and everyone responded as best they could. What matters now is that no one was hurt and we've prevented any serious damage. Perhaps we could use this as an opportunity to review our safety procedures and make sure everyone knows how to respond if something like this happens again." Her suggestion was practical, constructive, and delivered without any hint of criticism toward Mrs. Konate's poor leadership during the crisis. She had managed to diffuse a potentially explosive confrontation while offering a solution that would benefit everyone. That evening, as Ibrahim sat under the mango tree reflecting on the day's events, he realized that his admiration for Elena had evolved into something much deeper and more profound. This wasn't simply attraction to her kindness or respect for her character. This was love in its truest form. Love based on genuine understanding and appreciation of another person's essential qualities. But with this realization came an even more pressing dilemma. Every day that he continued his deception felt like a betrayal of the honesty that Elena deserved. Yet he also knew that revealing his true identity would fundamentally change the nature of their relationship. Would she still see him as the same person if she knew he was president? Would her feelings remain authentic, or would they be corrupted by the knowledge of his power and status? The questions had no easy answers, but Ibrahim knew that eventually he would have to choose between continuing his deception and risking the possibility of authentic love. As Ibrahim wrestled with his internal conflicts, he made a decision that would allow him to help Elena pursue her dreams without revealing his identity. If he couldn't yet be honest about who he was, at least he could use his resources to support her ambitions in a way that would appear to be the work of an anonymous benefactor. Through carefully orchestrated arrangements involving his trusted aide, Captain Ouedraogo, Ibrahim arranged for Elena's university tuition to be paid by an anonymous scholarship fund that supposedly supported promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The story was plausible enough. Such programs existed at universities throughout Africa, and the paperwork was handled through official channels that would raise no suspicions. The morning Elena received the news, her joy was radiant and infectious. She burst into the common area with tears streaming down her face, not tears of sorrow but of pure, overwhelming happiness. The scholarship would allow her to continue her medical studies while still working at the hostel to support her other expenses. "I don't know who did this," she told Ibrahim as they sat together under the mango tree that afternoon, "but someone out there believes in me. Someone thinks I'm worth investing in." Ibrahim felt his heart swell with a mixture of joy and guilt. Joy at seeing her happiness and guilt at the deception that made it possible. "Maybe," he said carefully, "it's someone who recognized your potential and wanted to help without seeking credit or recognition." Elena nodded thoughtfully. I like to think there are people in the world who do good things without expecting anything in return. It gives me hope that kindness still exists, even when everything else seems difficult. Her words cut deeply into Ibrahim's conscience. Here was someone who believed in anonymous kindness, who found hope in the idea that goodness could exist without expectation of reward or recognition. Yet his own act of generosity was tainted by his deception about his identity and circumstances. Over the following days, Elena threw herself into her studies with renewed vigor while continuing to perform her duties at the hostel with the same dedication and compassion that had first attracted Ibrahim's attention. If anything, her gratitude for the scholarship seemed to intensify her commitment to helping others, as if she were determined to pay forward the kindness she had received. But Ibrahim noticed other changes as well. Elena began to look at him differently, with a warmth and openness that hadn't been there before. Their conversations under the mango tree became longer and more intimate, touching on subjects beyond their immediate circumstances. She spoke about her dreams of returning to her village as a qualified doctor, of establishing a clinic that would serve people who had never had access to proper medical care. She talked about her family, parents who had sacrificed everything to give her the opportunity for education, younger siblings who looked up to her as an example of what was possible through hard work and determination. In return, Ibrahim found himself sharing more about his own background, though carefully edited to maintain his cover story. He spoke of his youth in rural areas, of understanding the challenges faced by ordinary people, of his belief in the importance of service to others. "You're different from the other workers," Elena observed one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "You speak like someone who has seen more of the world than most people in our position." The comment sent a chill of apprehension through Ibrahim. Was his cover story becoming less convincing? Was Elena beginning to suspect that he wasn't exactly who he claimed to be? "I've moved around a lot," he said carefully. "You pick up things from different places and different people." Elena nodded acceptingly, but Ibrahim sensed that she was storing away his words for further reflection. Her intelligence was evident in everything she did. It was only a matter of time before she began to notice inconsistencies in his story or aspects of his behavior that didn't quite fit his supposed background. As weeks turned into months, Ibrahim found himself living a double life that became increasingly difficult to maintain. During his days at the hostel, he was simply another maintenance worker, invisible, unremarkable, grateful for steady employment and basic accommodations. But the demands of his actual position as president couldn't be entirely ignored, requiring him to slip away periodically for essential meetings and decisions that couldn't be delegated. These absences were carefully orchestrated and explained as visits to family or temporary work assignments elsewhere, but they created stress and complications that weighed heavily on Ibrahim's conscience. Each time he returned to the hostel after handling presidential duties, he felt the jarring dissonance between his two lives more acutely. Meanwhile, his relationship with Elena had deepened into something that transcended their working circumstances. Their daily conversations under the mango tree had become the highlight of his existence, moments of genuine human connection that reminded him why he had embarked on this extraordinary deception in the first place. Elena had begun to confide in him about aspects of her life that she shared with no one else. She spoke about her fears that she might not be smart enough to succeed in medical school, despite her excellent grades and obvious intelligence. She worried about the financial burden her education placed on her family, even with the scholarship that had covered her tuition. She wondered whether she would be strong enough to handle the emotional demands of caring for sick and dying patients. These conversations revealed depths of character that impressed Ibrahim even more than her daily acts of kindness. Elena wasn't just compassionate and generous. She was also thoughtful, self-aware, and driven by a genuine desire to make a positive difference in the world. But perhaps most remarkably, she had begun to express feelings for him that clearly transcended their shared circumstances. During one particularly intimate conversation, as rain patted against the mango tree's leaves and created a sense of privacy around them, Elena had looked directly into his eyes and said, "You know, I've never met anyone quite like you. There's something about the way you see the world that makes me feel understood." The words should have filled Ibrahim with joy. They were exactly what he had hoped to hear. Proof that authentic love based on genuine understanding was possible. Instead, they intensified his guilt about the deception he was perpetrating. How could Elena truly understand him when he was hiding the most fundamental aspects of his identity? That night, lying in his narrow bed in the workers' quarters, Ibrahim made a decision that had been building for weeks. The time had come to reveal the truth about who he was, regardless of the consequences. Elena deserved honesty, and their relationship deserved to be built on a foundation of truth rather than deception. But before he could find the right moment and the right words to reveal his secret, an unexpected crisis would force his hand in ways he never could have anticipated. The crisis began with something as simple as a broken water pipe in the hostel's main building. What should have been a minor maintenance issue quickly escalated into a major emergency when the flooding reached the electrical systems, creating the potential for dangerous short circuits and the possibility of fire. The students were evacuated quickly and efficiently, but the building's infrastructure was seriously compromised. Mrs. Konate, faced with a problem beyond her experience or authority, had essentially abdicated responsibility, leaving the maintenance staff and remaining students to manage the crisis as best they could. It was Elena who stepped forward to coordinate the emergency response, displaying leadership qualities that impressed everyone present. She organized teams to move critical equipment and personal belongings to safety, arranged temporary accommodations for displaced students, and worked with the maintenance staff to isolate the electrical hazards and minimize the flooding. Throughout the crisis, Ibrahim found himself automatically taking charge of various aspects of the response, directing evacuation procedures, making quick decisions about resource allocation, and coordinating with external emergency services. His natural leadership abilities and experience managing complex situations under pressure were impossible to hide completely. When the immediate crisis had passed and the hostel was declared safe for reoccupation, Elena pulled Ibrahim aside. Her expression was thoughtful and slightly troubled, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "There's something about you that doesn't quite add up," she said directly, her voice gentle but probing. "The way you handled the emergency today, that wasn't the response of someone who's just a maintenance worker. You took charge like someone who's used to making important decisions and having people follow your lead." Ibrahim felt his carefully constructed cover story crumbling around him. He could offer more excuses, create more elaborate lies to explain away her observations. But the weight of deception had become unbearable. More importantly, Elena deserved the truth. Taking a deep breath that felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory, Ibrahim reached into his wallet and withdrew the one piece of identification he had kept with him throughout his time at the hostel, his official presidential identity card. With hands that trembled slightly, he handed the card to Elena. "You're right," he said quietly. "I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am." Elena took the card, her eyes widening as she read the words President Ibrahim Traoré and saw his official photograph. For a moment, she stared at the document in stunned silence, her mind clearly struggling to reconcile the man she had come to know with the identity revealed on the card. You're the president," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sounds of students returning to their rooms and normal hostel life resuming around them. "Yes," Ibrahim replied, his voice carrying the weight of months of carefully guarded secrets. "But everything else you know about me is true. The person you've come to know, the one who sweeps floors, who sits with you under the mango tree, who shared your lunch when I was hungry, that person is real. I came here because I needed to know if someone could love me for who I am inside, not for the power or prestige that comes with my position." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of understanding rather than betrayal or anger. "When I fell in love with you," she said softly, "I fell in love with a man who treated everyone with respect, who found dignity in honest work, who listened to my dreams without judgment. I fell in love with your character, not your circumstances." The words, "fell in love with you," hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning the gap between their two worlds. In that moment, Ibrahim realized that his extraordinary journey had succeeded beyond his wildest hopes. He had found someone who loved him not despite his humble disguise, but because of the qualities that disguise had revealed. The revelation of Ibrahim's true identity sent shockwaves through the hostel community. Students who had barely noticed the quiet maintenance worker suddenly found themselves starstruck by the realization that the president of Burkina Faso had been living among them, cleaning their corridors and eating in their dining hall. The reactions were as varied as the people themselves. Some students were embarrassed, remembering times they had been dismissive or rude to the new worker. Others were fascinated, bombarding Ibrahim with questions about politics, leadership, and what it was like to run a country. A few were skeptical, unable to believe that someone of such high status would voluntarily take on menial labor. Mrs. Konaté's reaction was perhaps the most dramatic. Upon learning that she had been ordering around and criticizing the nation's president for months, she locked herself in her office and refused to come out for an entire day. When she finally emerged, it was to tender her resignation, too mortified by her behavior to continue in her position. But it was Elena's response that mattered most to Ibrahim. After the initial shock had worn off, she had asked for time to process the revelation and think about what it meant for their relationship. The request had been reasonable, but the waiting was agonizing for Ibrahim, who feared that the magic of their connection might be broken by the reality of who he was. 3 days passed before Elena sought him out. She found him where she knew he would be, under the mango tree, sitting in the same spot where they had shared so many meaningful conversations. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the ground. "I've been thinking," she began, settling beside him with the comfortable familiarity of someone who belonged in that space. "About who you are, who I thought you were, and whether there's really any difference." Ibrahim waited, his heart pounding with anticipation and fear. "The man I fell in love with," Elena continued, "was someone who treated a crying student with kindness, who shared his lunch with someone who was hungry, who worked alongside others without complaint or arrogance. That man exists whether he's a maintenance worker or a president. The position doesn't change the character." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "What concerns me isn't that you're president. What concerns me is that you felt you had to lie about it to find love. That suggests you've been surrounded by people who only valued you for what you could give them, not for who you are, and that makes me sad for you." Her insight into his motivations and her compassion for his situation moved Ibrahim deeply. "I've spent years wondering if anyone could love me without wanting something from me," he admitted. "Power attracts people, but it also corrupts relationships. I needed to know if genuine love was possible." "It is," Elena said simply. "But it requires honesty from both people. Now that I know the truth, can you promise me that there will be no more deceptions between us?" "I promise," Ibrahim replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Elena smiled, the same radiant expression that had first caught his attention months earlier. "Then we can move forward together, knowing that our love is built on truth." The weeks following Ibrahim's revelation brought significant changes to both their lives. The secret of his identity could not be contained within the hostel indefinitely, and soon, news of the president's extraordinary undercover experience began to spread through the university and beyond. Rather than retreating to the safety and comfort of the presidential palace, Ibrahim made a decision that surprised many observers. He arranged to split his time between his official duties and continued involvement with the hostel community. The experience of living as an ordinary citizen had given him insights into the daily struggles and aspirations of his people that no briefing or report could have provided. Elena became his guide in navigating this new balance between presidential responsibilities and genuine human connection. Her medical studies continued with renewed focus. She was now in her final year and approaching the completion of her degree, but she also began to play an informal role in Ibrahim's efforts to implement policies that addressed the real needs of ordinary citizens, the hostel itself, became something of a model for how institutions could function with greater compassion and efficiency. Mrs. Konate's replacement, a younger woman named Aminata Sawadogo, brought a management style that emphasized collaboration rather than authoritarian control. The maintenance staff, inspired by the example of the president who had worked alongside them, took greater pride in their work and developed innovative solutions to long-standing problems. Students, too, were transformed by the experience. The knowledge that someone of such high status had chosen to work among them, to perform humble tasks without complaint, challenged their assumptions about dignity, worth, and the value of different types of work. Many began to treat the maintenance staff with greater respect and appreciation, recognizing the essential role they played in maintaining a functional living environment. But perhaps the most significant change was in Ibrahim himself. The months of living as an ordinary worker had stripped away layers of protocol, privilege, and political calculation that had accumulated over years in office. He found himself approaching presidential duties with a renewed sense of purpose and a clearer understanding of how policy decisions affected real people in their daily lives. Elena often accompanied him to official events now, not as arm candy or political decoration, but as a trusted advisor whose perspective from the margins of society provided valuable insights into the impact of government decisions. Her presence reminded him constantly of the values and principles that had brought them together: compassion, integrity, service to others, and the belief that every person deserved to be treated with dignity regardless of their circumstances. Their relationship, while built on a foundation of genuine love and mutual respect, was not without its challenges. The pressures of public life, the demands of Ibrahim's presidential duties, and the scrutiny that inevitably accompanied their courtship created stresses that tested their commitment to each other. Elena struggled with the loss of privacy that came with being associated with the president. Simple activities like studying in the library or meeting with friends became complicated by security protocols and public attention. There were times when she questioned whether the love they shared was worth the sacrifices required to maintain it. Ibrahim, meanwhile, faced criticism from political opponents who portrayed his time at the hostel as either a publicity stunt or evidence of mental instability. Some questioned whether a president who would abandon his duties to work as a janitor could be trusted with the serious responsibilities of national leadership. But these external pressures only served to strengthen their bond. They had found each other under the most unlikely circumstances, had built their love on a foundation of truth and mutual understanding, and had weathered the initial shock of revelation. The challenges of public life seemed manageable by comparison. Elena's medical degree was completed with highest honors, an achievement that brought pride not only to herself and her family, but to the entire nation. Her graduation ceremony became a celebration of the power of education, determination, and the support systems that help individuals achieve their dreams. In her valedictorian speech, Elena spoke about the unexpected ways that love and opportunity can enter our lives. Sometimes the most profound changes come not from grand gestures or dramatic events, but from quiet moments of human connection. Sometimes the person who will change your life forever is sitting right beside you, sharing shade under the same tree. The audience didn't need to know the specific details of her story to understand the truth she was expressing. Everyone had experienced moments when a chance encounter, a kind word, or an unexpected friendship had altered the course of their lives in meaningful ways. As Elena established her medical practice in a rural clinic that served several remote villages, Ibrahim found that his approach to presidential leadership had been fundamentally transformed by their relationship and his experience living as an ordinary citizen. He began to implement policies that reflected a deeper understanding of how government decisions affected real families and communities. Healthcare became a particular focus of his administration. Working closely with Elena and drawing on her expertise as well as her network of healthcare professionals, Ibrahim launched initiatives to expand medical services to underserved areas, improve medical education and training programs, and ensure that basic healthcare was accessible to all citizens regardless of their economic circumstances. The model of leadership he developed emphasized direct engagement with citizens rather than reliance on intermediaries and official reports. He regularly visited schools, hospitals, markets, and rural communities, often with minimal security and formal protocol, to listen to people's concerns and observe the impact of government policies firsthand. Elena often accompanied him on these visits, particularly when they involved healthcare facilities or medical issues. Her presence served multiple purposes. She provided technical expertise on medical matters. Her background as someone from a modest family helped establish credibility with ordinary citizens. And her perspective as someone who had worked in service positions gave her insights into the challenges faced by workers in various sectors. But beyond her practical contributions, Elena's influence on Ibrahim's leadership style was profound. She had taught him that true strength lay not in the exercise of power over others, but in the willingness to serve others with humility and compassion. The president who had once commanded through authority now led through example and genuine care for his people's welfare. When Ibrahim and Elena announced their engagement, it became a national celebration that transcended political divisions and social boundaries. Their love story, the president who had disguised himself as a janitor to find authentic love, and the medical student whose character had captured his heart, captured the imagination of people throughout Burkina Faso and beyond. The wedding ceremony reflected the values that had brought them together. Rather than an elaborate state affair designed to demonstrate presidential prestige, they chose a celebration that emphasized community, service, and the dignity of ordinary people. The ceremony was held at the university where they had met, under the same mango tree where they had shared so many meaningful conversations. The guest list included not only political leaders and international dignitaries, but also the maintenance workers, students, and hostel staff who had been part of their story. Elena's fellow medical students served as bridesmaids, while some of Ibrahim's former colleagues from his maintenance duties acted as groomsmen. In his wedding speech, Ibrahim reflected on the journey that had brought them together. "I thought I was searching for someone who could love me despite my position as president. Instead, I found someone who loved me because of the person I chose to be when nobody was watching. Elena didn't fall in love with my title or my power. She fell in love with my character. That kind of love doesn't diminish a person. It elevates them." Elena, in her response, spoke about the deeper meaning of their story. "Love finds us in the most unexpected places and in the most unexpected ways. It doesn't care about status or circumstances. It recognizes the heart of another person and reaches out to connect. Our story is proof that authentic relationships are possible when we have the courage to be vulnerable and honest with each other." The celebration continued long into the night, with music, dancing, and the kind of joyful community gathering that reflects the best aspects of human nature. Students danced with presidential advisors, maintenance workers shared tables with government ministers, and Elena's rural relatives mixed effortlessly with urban intellectuals and international visitors. Years later, as Ibrahim reflected on the decision that had changed his life, he realized that his time as a maintenance worker at the University Hostel had been about much more than finding romantic love. It had been about rediscovering his own humanity and reconnecting with the people. He had been elected to serve. Elena's medical practice had grown into a network of rural clinics that served as a model for healthcare delivery in underserved areas. Her work demonstrated that quality medical care could be provided efficiently and compassionately, even in challenging circumstances. She had also become a mentor to young women from modest backgrounds who aspired to careers in medicine and other professional fields. Together, they had established a foundation that provided scholarships and support services for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, ensuring that financial circumstances would not prevent talented and motivated young people from pursuing their educational dreams. The foundation operated on the principle that everyone deserved the opportunity to develop their potential and contribute to society. Their marriage had produced 2 children, a daughter who showed early signs of her mother's compassion and her father's leadership qualities, and a son whose intellectual curiosity and sense of justice suggested he might follow either parent's path of service to others. Ibrahim's presidency deeply influenced by the insights gained during his time living as an ordinary citizen, became known for its focus on human dignity, social justice, and the belief that government should serve all people equally regardless of their social or economic status. His policies emphasized education, healthcare, economic opportunity, and the kind of moral leadership that inspired citizens to see themselves as part of a larger community working toward common goals. But perhaps most importantly, their story had become a source of hope and inspiration for countless people who struggled to find authentic love and meaningful connection in a world that often seemed driven by superficial values and material considerations. The mango tree behind the University Hostel still stands, its broad canopy providing shade for students and workers who need a quiet place to rest, think, or dream about their futures. A small plaque at its base, installed at Elena's suggestion, bears a simple inscription: "Love finds us when we least expect it, and often where we least expect it." It recognizes not our titles or possessions, but the content of our character. Visitors to the site often ask about the significance of the tree and the meaning of the inscription. Those who know the story share it gladly, understanding that it contains lessons that extend far beyond the specific circumstances of one couple's extraordinary courtship. The story of Ibrahim and Elena has become a modern parable about the power of authenticity, the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances, and the possibility of finding genuine love in a world that often seems dominated by ulterior motives and hidden agendas. But perhaps its most important message is about the dignity of all honest work and the value of all human beings regardless of their circumstances. Ibrahim's willingness to perform humble labor with pride and Elena's ability to maintain her integrity and compassion despite difficult circumstances demonstrated that character is not determined by external conditions, but by internal choices. Their love story reminds us that true leadership comes not from the exercise of power over others, but from the willingness to serve others with humility and genuine care. It suggests that the most profound connections between people are based not on what they can do for each other, but on who they choose to be when they think nobody is watching. In a world that often seems divided by differences in wealth, status, education, and opportunity, the story of the president and the maintenance worker who fell in love under a mango tree offers hope that authentic human connection remains possible. It reminds us that love, at its best, sees past all external barriers to recognize and celebrate the essential humanity that connects us all. And in the end, that may be the most important lesson of all, that we are all, regardless of our circumstances, searching for the same things: to be seen, understood, valued, and loved for who we truly are beneath all the roles we play and masks we wear. When we have the courage to be vulnerable and authentic with each other, we create the possibility for the kind of deep, transformative love that can change not only our own lives, but the world around us. The story continues, as all the best love stories do, not with an ending, but with a beginning. The beginning of a life built on truth, sustained by love and dedicated to the service of others. Under the shade of that old mango tree, two hearts had found their home in each other, and in doing so, had discovered that the greatest power of all is the power to love and be loved in return. The end.